Thank you, Vince. I appreciate that. Now, what Vince didn't tell you is that when we first got to know each other, and some people you meet, you kind of click and you hit it off, and we did that, but it had nothing to do with theology. It had nothing to do with religion. It had nothing to do with our faith story. It had nothing to do with faith and work. Turns out he's an old rock and roll junkie, as am I. So we quickly devolved into talking about David Bowie and Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, which John may have a little bit to say about, and other just classic rock bands. So maybe I've let the cat out of the bag. If they thought you were this sort of straight arrow, I hate to let you all know. Second, I want to say it's a joy for me to be back here at Wheaton. I have been here on and off over the past 10, 12 years. One person who plays a little bit of the history of your fine school, Bill Pollard, is a friend of mine. He sits on my advisory board at Princeton, also a good friend of John Tyson's. So it's a treat to be back here. I've had the chance of preaching in your chapel once and just being in some of your events, so it's great to be back. And lastly, to Bill and Marianne, to see you both here, that we get together through Howard Butt and the Lady Lodge Forum every couple of years, and which is another organization all about. In fact, the tagline for this organization is work as a higher calling. Not just high, but higher. Fascinating. And we'll unpack some of that as we're here today. So it's a joy. We're going to have a conversation. John and I are so full disclosure, we're personal friends as well as having a business relationship. John sits on my advisory board for the Princeton Faith and Work Initiative, and we each care passionately about this question of integrating faith and work. So whatever your faith tradition, whether you're Christian, Jewish, a tree hugger, or as John likes to say, a bass fisherman, whatever it is, we believe some things. We hold them deeply and dearly, and they shape and influence who we are, and we're going to talk about some of that stuff. But it's also not always easy. You trip your toe. You don't always get it right, and some industries are tougher than others, and we're going to talk about that. I mean, John leads one of the world's largest organizations in the protein business. You may not think of Tyson Foods that way, but in the protein business, beef, pork, poultry, products that roughly, if I remember my stats right, John, about 1 in 4 meals consumed in the U.S. where someone's had one of those protein items has probably come through your business somehow.
Comes from us, yeah.
Comes from you somehow. So that could be anything from chicken McNuggets to prepared foods, or a chicken or beef or poultry or pork you might make at home. John's also in a tough industry. You know, there's some, maybe some of you might want to go in the software industry where it's kind of a clean industry. You don't have to worry about environmental issues. You probably don't have to worry about immigration issues unless you want to get someone from India on a B1 visa. You probably aren't worrying about health and safety issues. You probably aren't worrying about someone in a software company going home with their arm cut off one day. It's a different industry. Well, John is trying to live out his faith, and through the company he leads, in a tough industry. And we're going to talk about some of those issues. Some, I think, with good reason, the company can kind of stand tall about, and others, were frankly, where there's still work to go. And that's what we're going to chat about, some of this stuff. So my job is to be the interlocutor, and that's my 10-cent word, John.
It's a big word.
Yeah, so in other words, I'm going to lead the chit-chat. We're going to visit some, and I'll ask John, I'll do my Oprah Winfrey imitation, and we'll ask John some questions. We're going to have a conversation. At some point, I'm going to weave you all in. So as you're listening here and hearing what we're saying, if you think some of it's a bunch of baloney and you say, like, hey, come on, that's not what I read in the papers, or I Googled you before I came in, well, we want to hear that, and we'll chat about that. Or if John says something, or if I happen to say something that intrigues you, well, we want to hear that too, and we'll have a conversation.
At any time, raise your hand to ask a question. Dave and I prefer that type of interactive conversation versus him and I sitting up here thinking that we only have all the knowledge. So feel free to raise your hand. We'd appreciate that.
Particularly if it's a pressing thing where one of us says something that you go, I just don't buy it, or that's weird, or that's odd. Like, raise your hand, and we'll have that conversation. So we can know you. You know a lot about us. But briefly, how many of you are students? Just show of hands. Terrific. Welcome. How many of you are faculty? Show of hands. And how many are folks? Yeah, you're not sure, Bill. Kind of retired. Is that what this is? All right. And how many are just folks from town and just other interested friends, so forth? Great. Well, that gives us a little sense of who you all are. Let me make one other comment, and we'll jump into the conversation. Vince asked me to do this, so I want to do what my host says. It's not talking about David Bowie's new single. There's something out there.
It is.
There was, and I don't think that's the case at Wheaton, but I've seen it at other schools I've been to, particularly schools that have a sort of a Christian underpinning and a Christian identity, that there's this sense that there's kind of a hierarchy of Christians. And at the lower end of the hierarchy are sort of the wretched, unsaved sinners. And then you move up and maybe you become a saved sinner, and you move up and maybe you join a church, you get baptized, and maybe then you become a deacon or an elder or a Sunday school teacher, and then there's those rare few who are called to preach, and now we're really getting close to the super Christian, right? And what's the ultimate Christian in this hierarchy? Yeah, an overseas missionary, right? Not just to the inner city, but we're going somewhere scary and far away. Well, you know, that's interesting, and I understand that, and all those are really important parts of the journey. But now I'm a follower of Christ out of the Protestant tradition within that, the Presbyterian wing, so I'm kind of a Calvinist. To me, that's sloppy theology. It's bad theology. That we're all in this together, and we're all called to different kinds of ministry, all called to different kinds of work. And it could be anything from pushing a broom to leading a big company and everything in between. And that's just as godly and important as working in a nonprofit, as being a pastor, or other sorts of things. Different ways of showing God's creation to the world. With that, there used to be this thing, and in fact, we'll talk about it, that there's sort of this, I'll come back. We'll talk about the Faith at Work movement. I want you to chat a bit about how you sense a lot of people sort of have this separation of church and state, and we'll get into that. But briefly, an intro, Johnny, been in the business for a long time, and let's get to know John first as a little bit as a person, as a human being, and not this big bad chairman, CEO, and all that sort of title stuff. So John, you're a guy. You grew up. People might think you had a silver spoon in your hand, right? But it was a little different than that, wasn't it?
Well, our company was a small company. I started working when I was 14. We had one plant, about 50 or 60 people. And so I got to grow up in the company. I got to see the evolution of the company. I got to see the transition. In fact, I got to sit around with my dad and his management team and got to see a lot of demystification of what goes on inside a company. Went off to college. I'm a recovering alcoholic and drug addict. Had a little wayward space there, but the good Lord was always there, always took care of me along the way. And as our company grew, we expanded, and today we sit at some numbers. We process about 44 million chickens a week.
Let's just pause a sec. 44 million chickens a week.
About 300,000 head of hog a week, and about 160,000 head of cattle a week. If you go buy a Prada purse, the leather on a Prada purse comes from our cattle. If you go buy a Ferrari, or you buy a Lexus, or you buy a Toyota, the leather that comes off of our cattle are in those animals. So I say that is, if you think about the protein, there's a tendency to focus just on that we use in human consumption, but all the byproducts are used in a way that enter into the marketplace and allow us to recover it. Today we got 100,000 plus people that work for us, 33 states. Got 19 ethnic groups in the company. We got people from Bosnia, Somalia, Sudan, a lot of the Hispanic countries, Mexico, Central America, South America. So the diversity of our company allows us to sit at the intersection of a lot of issues, social issues, environmental issues, food safety issues, animal welfare issues. The company in its transition from just being a poultry company to being an all-protein company has been interesting, merging cultures. We've bought over 60 some odd companies through the years. We've had internal growth, but the acquisition growth allowed us to grow within the food industry. I've been fortunate to work with a lot of good people. My transition and my learning curve basically started working out on the farms, working at the back of the plant, and absorbed the behavior. One of my first management lessons that I got.
Yeah, you can tell a story about this. Is one of my favorite stories about. You're not going to get this in your MBA program if any of you go to an MBA school. I guarantee you. But listen.
So I'm 16 years old, and I'm about half cocky because I'm the boss's son, and got a little bit of attitude as a 16-year-old teenager. And I've been asked to go to Green Forest, Arkansas, to learn how and see how a plant runs. And there was a gentleman there named Manny Terminella, and he said, "Well, we're going to show you how a plant works."
This is a chicken plant, right? Poultry process?
Chicken plant, yeah.
Yep.
And so I say to myself, okay, this can't be too hard. So Manny takes me out to the back of the plant. If you can imagine a bunch of chicken coops coming down a conveyor belt, then going into the process where they get hung to go through the dispatching process. And Manny says, well, pay attention. This is how we do it. So Manny reaches up and grabs a chicken coop, tilts it, and puts it on the conveyor belt, and it goes on down the road. And I'm saying, how hard can this? Well, I reach up and grab the coop, I tilt it, and chicken litter hits me in the face all the way down. Well, it had been raining all day long. And what Manny had done, he had taken the coop, had slid it to the right a little bit, had tilted it so all of that would slide down. I looked at him, I said, well, what do we do now? He says, well, you stay here and work, I'm going to go back in the plant. So I'm the boss's son going, oh, wait a minute, there's something wrong with this picture. So I stayed there about another 5 or 6 hours. Manny comes back out, and he'd gone to the local dry goods store and gone and got me a change of clothes. And he said, there's 2 things we do in this business. We pay attention to details because we're a low margin business, and we take care of our people. That was at age 16, and those 2 lessons stay with me today by that simple action of that today. I say that as a lesson of how do we learn each and every way when we interact with somebody to pay attention. Now that was a real wake-up call. I think there's other ways to learn. I think there's other ways to have an opportunity to understand. But that stays with me today as I went through the company. Another thing that was important to me was I got to grow up with my dad and his management team. And I think one of the things that people think there's a lot of big stuff that goes on when CEOs and chairmen of the boards get behind the doors. And what really happens when the doors close, it's a bunch of men and women trying to figure out how to solve a business problem. And that took a lot of mystery out of it because we see the doors close and it looks like the big guys, maybe the president of the university and the professors are closing the door and something important's going on there. But in reality, all that's going on is a set of human beings trying to take a set of questions and trying to solve a problem. That helped me take some mystery out of the business world as I got the chance to grow up. I share that with you as a couple of lessons that I had. But for me, the real opportunity is how do we make a difference in the marketplace with our faith? How do we create a mission field where you can live your faith in the marketplace? And at our company, we've tried to create an environment where we call our company, we strive to be faith-friendly. We don't say we're a Christian-based organization. We don't say we're a Christian-dominated. We say to our folks, we're faith-friendly, so everybody can come to the table with their faith. I'm an Episcopalian, and everybody knows that that's my faith. But how do we create an environment in the workplace so you can be your complete person? I don't know how many stories I've read in the Wall Street where they talk about, well, people ride their bicycle to work, they bring their dogs, they bring their skateboard and stuff like that. And I'm going, well, if you can bring your dog, you can bring your skateboard, and you can bring your bicycle, and you can sleep overnight in the office, why can't you bring your faith to the marketplace? Why can't you bring that? Because I think there's a generational issue that goes on. We grow up so much with separation of state and church. You can't have your faith in the school. I think some people translate that that's just an assumed rule in the marketplace, that you can't live your faith in the marketplace. It's not written anywhere. So the evolution of the ideal of how we integrate our principles and our faith in the marketplace is an ongoing challenge. David's one of the experts in it. He's been studying it for the last 8 or 10 years and has a lot more insight into it now. But that'll be kind of a little bit of opening, David, and keep moving forward.
That's a terrific opening. And just one thing in this sort of faith and work that Johnny is talking about, it is, it actually qualifies as a bona fide social movement. And if there's some sociologists in the room, you all know there's certain criteria what constitutes a social movement. And there's various attributes that I don't need to bore you with. But just like there's the civil rights movement, the women's movement, there's a variety of movements which have changed the force of society. Well, this faith at work movement is a bona fide movement. I know Bill Moore and our friends from Packmore, they're really interested in this question too. How do you take a business, whether it's privately held or publicly traded, and have it serve God? How do you create a context which people can bring their whole self to work? Whether they're an atheist, whether they're evangelical, whether they're Jewish, whatever, how can they bring their whole self to work? And men and women around the country and increasingly around the world, from Beijing to Buffalo, New York, are asking, how do I do that? And can I bring myself to work, and what's it look like? And that's a lot of what John and I think about. And he's very gracious and lets me come up with crazy ideas, and we take him into a little laboratory called Tyson Foods and test them with 100,000 of his team members and find out which ideas work and don't. John, you used a phrase, you kind of threw it out of faith-friendly. Let's back up. How did you get there, and talk a bit about your core values as a company and what that's about?
Well, the core values are the principles we try to run our company with. In 2001, 2002, I, working with the management team, took our company from being poultry-based only to buying the largest beef and pork company in the United States so we could be in all 3 proteins. My reasoning was pretty simple. Even though I'd like you to eat chicken 3 times a day, 365 days a year, it's not going to be practical. So how could we, in effect, create a diversified portfolio of proteins to take advantage of the demographics and the eating patterns in America and then around the world? Out of that, we had 2 strong cultures, the culture of the acquiring company and the culture of the company we acquired. And my first instinct was to maybe hope it would work out, that everybody'd kind of get along and they'd work and merge things together. But after about 6 months, it became clear to me that I needed to to, in effect, articulate what the values of the new company would be. And out of that conversation with the folks that helped me run the company, we came up with a set of core values. And at the same time, my faith was expanding, my faith was changing. We had just instituted the chaplaincy program at our company, or restarted it at our company.
Well, wait, time out, bracket, chaplaincy at a company. I want to come back to that in a second.
And so out of that came our core values. And in the core values came the conversation, and David needs to take credit for this. We tried to articulate who we were, what we wanted to be, and how we would do it. And we talked about, I'd start to say, well, we're this. And I say, we're going to do this. And David would go, yeah, sure you're going to do this. And sure you're going to do that. So we, instead of saying we're a Christian-based company, we said, how do we create an environment that's inclusive? How do we create an environment where we give people permission to live their faith, talk about their faith, with the diversity that was in our company, the diversity of faith, the diversity of people, and we articulated ourselves to faith-friendly, not faith-based, not Christian-based, not any of the big faiths, but faith-friendly, that then in hopes that there'd be a conversation about how people interact together. So.
Yeah, and also what John's talking about when he said, well, we're this, this, and this, and I kind of politely as I could said, well, you're not always. You know, you screw up, you make mistakes, you get sued, you've done bad things here and there, and what about that? And so we came up with this language of we strive. So if you go to their website, TysonFoods.com, you'll find their core values open to the public on public inspection. It says we strive to be this, we strive to be that. I mean, let's face it, strive is a strong word. It's acknowledging your humanness, acknowledging your fallenness, your sinfulness, that we make mistakes, but nevertheless a commitment to try to strive for something. And that's a big part of it. You know, a quick anecdote if I can. Their chief marketing officer, when this first sort of got solidified and put together, he went up to Canada to give a presentation to peers from other sort of big blue chip companies. It's all chief marketing officers, and they were all talking about here's our marketing campaign, here's our slogans, and here's what we're doing. Remember Bob did this, and he went up and he had one slide, just a little introductory slide, you know, where one slide was sort of the size and scope of the business for people who didn't know what Tyson Foods did, and another slide, oh, by the way, here's who we're striving to be, here's our core values. And then he went on for about another 30 PowerPoint slides about all his slick marketing stuff. At the end, he was mobbed by everybody. No one wanted to talk about the marketing campaign. All they wanted to talk about was the core values. They were blown away that the word God and faith-friendly were in them.
Yeah, this is going to build on the word strive. If you think about the word strive and some of the challenges we've got in our business, you know, I could sit here and say we're environmentally friendly. But, you know, we're not perfect in that. I could say we do things right in the marketplace. I could say we do things right when it comes to animal welfare issues. I could say we do things right when it comes to the processing. But what we try to do each day is get up and strive to do it better than we did it the day before. What are the changing opportunities? What are the changing marketplace needs out there? So the word strive gives us permission to acknowledge we're not doing it perfect today. It also gives us permission to say things will change and evolve, and we need to strive to change and evolve as the marketplace changes and as information comes into how we better manage our business, interact with our customers, interact with our people. So I think the word striving is trying to make a definitive statement of who we are. Striving to be the best we can and being responsible for the obligations give to us gives us a bigger room to adjust and a bigger room to continue to improve and make ourselves better each and every day. And I think it's a critical word within our core values because to make a definitive statement I think is just not correct and not accurate.
I want to come talk about, you know, Vince, you said that your theme has been tough questions. I want to come back and talk about some of the tough things because, you know, the cynic in the room is going to say you're doing all this God stuff, but, you know, I know you got immigration problems and you got chicken shit runoff problems, chicken litter, sorry. I got to get my technical terms right.
Depends which room you're in.
It's in the English vocabulary. Come on, folks. All right, and there's a host of stuff, and let's talk about, we'll come back to a couple of them, because that's the world you live in, and you're not afraid to talk about them, and some things you might be surprised, there's some exciting things, and some places there's work to go still, and we'll talk about it. But you threw in this word workplace chaplains program. I mean, we all know about chaplains, and many of you may want to go into the ministry, ordained ministry, and be ordained. Some of you may want to be a military chaplain, or a hospital chaplain, or a prison chaplain, but a workplace chaplain? Come on, John. What's the deal?
Well,
tell us a bit about this.
How we got to workplace chaplain was part of my story, and we had bought a company called Hudson Foods in 91 or 92 or 93. I'll give you an example of interaction between government and business. Red was running a good business, him and his family. But there was an E. coli break in Denver in the summer of, I've got 91, 92, or 93. And the government, in its good interest, took a very public position and what I would say to a degree overreacted to the allegations of E. coli. And the pressure was so intense on Red, he picked up the phone and called us and said, I'm tired, I want to sell my company, and we were able to buy Red's company. It turned out that the tracing of the E. coli was never traced back to the plant on the markers and stuff. But one of the things the management team did at that time was quickly fire 6 chaplains to save a little money and to pay for the company. So when I got into my position and my faith was evolving and growing, and I was spending a lot of time thinking about, what I should do, where I should go. One of the things that I think a lot of us think about doing is, well, should we take our interest or our faith and go do work around the world? And so I was saying to myself, well, maybe I should go spend some time in Mexico or South America or Africa, a lot of the traditional missionary work. But it didn't feel real to me. It didn't feel like I was going to be fake to go over and say, okay, well, I've gone and done missionary work and like check the box. And so out of that came a very clear statement to me was, well, Johnny, there's this big company called Tyson Foods. There, in effect, is a mission field there. What would that look like? So I took the time and called Alan Tyson, who had been head of the chaplains at Hudson Foods, and asked Alan to come back.
No relation, just coincidence, right?
Just
Last
coincidence.
name? Yep.
To come back and, in effect, restart our chaplain program. And so Alan came back. We started with 1 or 2 chaplains, and I think today we're up to about 120 or 25 chaplains. It's an evolving process. One of the
Did you shove it down everyone's throat and say, corporate policy, this is what I like, you got to do this, or what?
Well, that's where there's what we call, CEOs, we call it the flavor of the month. And if you run a business, you'll appreciate this statement. For the young kids in the room, there's a tendency to glaze over when the boss says we're going to do this in the organization. Well, let's wait 6 months and see if the boss really wants to do that, and if he does, we'll spend our time and effort on it. And but out of the process, Alan and I realized very quickly we could not mandate the chaplaincy program. We had to let it set there. We had to let it have its own life. And so we used the kind of the concept, a program of attraction, a program of permission. And we got 2 or 3 chaplains. 4 or 5 months later, another 2 or 3 chaplains. In effect, it's got its own life. And I think an testament to our chaplaincy program is that in 07, 08, when we had the first big break in corn where it went from $3 to $8 and everybody in the protein industry was fighting their balance sheet, one of the things the management team chose not to do at that time was to take the chaplaincy program out of the company, because it would have been pretty easy to cut that and it would have been pretty hard. So that's a testament to what the chaplaincy program does, what it carries into the marketplace, and what it does for our folks in making a difference. And it's fun to watch, it's interesting to watch. The role that they play within the company is more about listening, because I think in most corporations today, the HR department is responsible for the paperwork. They don't have time to listen because they're processing, where's my insurance check, where's this check, where's my dental forms, where's this, where's my reimbursement, so they don't have time to listen. And the chaplain, in effect, steps into that role on a way to listen, to see what's going on, to be a person to have an ear when something's going on or something difficult's going on in an individual's life. And it's woven into us now, and I'd be hard-pressed to see that would ever come out in the future. And I think that's where you were going.
Yeah, exactly right. And yeah, please jump in.
What's the confidentiality obligation of the chaplain to the person
That's a
they're
good question,
working with versus the company? I don't know if are they an employee of the company? Or?
They're part-time employees of the company, and the legal obligation is don't break the law. And after that, all confidentiality stays with whatever's shared with the chaplain up to, you can't hold knowledge that would be breaking a federal law, a state law, a labor law, a safety law, a quality law, or something like that. But otherwise, the confidentiality stays there.
Let me ask you, sort of follow up, maybe think of that. Do you ever get people saying, well, hang on, are these chaplains sort of like stools of management, like you're using them to sort of like dull the people's senses, and that you're manipulating people through having these chaplains. Does that ever come up at all?
Well, I think
kind of a cynical view of it,
I think it's a fair question, a right question. Most of the chaplains that work for us work in their own church or in their own community, so they're part of the community over here, in effect, pastoring. One of the questions I ask the chaplains is, why do you do this type of work in the marketplace? And to a person, most of them will say, it gets me back to why I originally entered in to do pastoral work, to interact with people, to be involved with people, to offer assistance. Whereas now I'm in a church and I got to run the church, I got to worry about paying the secretary. So it's an interesting relationship. The question is there, it always needs to be, but then I think you got to go to the integrity of the chaplains. And you got to go to the trust factor that the chaplains come with their own sense of integrity, their own sense of internal wiring. And from there, then you have confidence that you know they're walking balanced, so to say.
And on that point, you or the director of chaplain services has fired chaplains, has fired them for either professional misconduct or because they're also not supposed to proselytize. So there's a couple ground rules of behavior, and some people, for understandable reasons, can't abide by certain things, and they have been dismissed. So there is a quality control that goes on. They're not just sort of freewheeling agents.
Supposed to be, yeah.
I mean, and it doesn't always get right, I know that, but
No,
yeah.
so. We got a question over here.
Yeah.
Do what?
Are they faith-specific chaplains? Are you trying to
Oh, right.
keep a diversity of faith?
The chaplains are kind of a guideline. It's kind of a base guideline. Is what is the profile of the plant? You hate to use that, but depending on what community they're in, maybe in one place it might lean towards the Baptist minister in the area being the chaplain. You might go to another place, it's the Catholic priest. So it's all over the board in terms of the different roles of chaplains. We do have a fair amount of military chaplains coming out of the service because they have been, they've spent a lot of time working across all faiths, so they have a skill set that they learned by being in the military of interacting with different faiths and different challenges. But it's a case-by-case basis based on the community and kind of the makeup of the community that's there that guides us, and then who raises their hand. But that's kind of the basic guidelines.
And just to build on it, because it's a great question, then this is great. Let's just do what we're doing now. We'll kind of just open it up and follow our noses. There are, if you look at, I think, the 130 plus or minus right now, it's going to look like a little mini United Nations if I had a picture up there. Black, white, male, female, Asian, Latino, predominantly Christian writ large, but within that 101 slices and varieties. There's a Catholic nun who's one of the people. You have a few plants that have a very high population of Muslims. At one point you've had an imam as well, and if someone is uncomfortable, there's a referral system in each of the networks. So it's, to John's point, it tries to reflect the spiritual profile or needs of a community. You can't always get it perfect, but that's the design concept. Yeah, and I'm sorry, Bill, then you, just to keep you, if you don't mind.
You mainly talked about what they do is one-on-one. Do they do anything in groups? Like, do they organize Bible study groups? Do they have chapel services, like before work, or now and then? Or?
The Bible studies and the chapel service would be up to the individuals in the plant if they want to organize the Bible study, and then if they want the chaplain to come maybe assist in that. But for the chaplain to organize the study, we don't encourage that. Their role is to be there to assist across the plant. But then if somebody approaches them and says, I'd like to gain more knowledge, to have a further understanding of an issue, sometimes our chaplains will be involved in weddings because nobody has any place to go to. Sometimes when there's an accident in a community, let's say a person has a car accident and they're seriously injured and they're at the hospital, the chaplain will in effect interact with the family because they don't have a faith group around them to in effect provide that. So they step into many roles. The chaplains will, David and I are supervisors in the plant, and we know that Mary's struggling and that one of the kids is not behaving well at home. Well, David and I might say to the chaplain, Mary that's working over there in the line 6 over there in the back of the plant, there's some issues going on at home. So what the chaplain may do is go by to Mary and say, hey Mary, how you doing? I'm around if you want to talk. And then just move on down the line. And she may say, well, I'd like to talk to you, not say anything. 30 days later say, hey Chaplain David, do you mind if I sit down and talk to you? And so that's kind of the role of the chaplains, is to be available for a conversation, to be available there to take on some issues, maybe to answer a simple question like, my daughter's pregnant. Where would I go to get consulting on that as to how to manage that? So it's it's a role of taking on some questions they might feel uncomfortable asking the supervisor, or they might feel uncomfortable asking one of their teammates, and the chaplain provides a safe place and a safe place to go for Q&A to start with and to see where it leads to.
Well, here's another example. One of the times I was out visiting Chaplain Allen, the head chaplain for all the chaplain services, and we were driving somewhere. And in the car, he said, his cell phone rang, excuse me, I got to take it, sure. And it was a Latina woman who was being sexually harassed by her supervisor in one of the plants. She was terrified to go to her, to sort of go through the normal sort of HR channel. So she called the chaplain and said, can I talk to you? Here's what's going on. And they kind of worked through, here's a game plan, because obviously this is not right. We need to fix it, but how to protect her in the process. That she felt she could go to a chaplain, it would be safe, whereas if she went to the normal line management, it wouldn't be safe. So things like that kind of come up. They go, wow, I never really thought about that. I think, sir? Yeah.
Yeah, so I had a question there when you mentioned about proselytizing. I've been involved in some situations in my own job where, you know, it's supposed to be faith-friendly, and what that means it's okay until you say God or you say Jesus, and then all of a sudden it's not faith-friendly anymore. And, you know, I find it kind of interesting there, because it's almost, we want people to have faith, but we really don't want them to bring faith to work, right, and show the thing. And I guess when you talk about proselytizing, where do you draw that line? Because some of the areas I've been at, it's actually been people who say I'm Christian, yet they come and see me because they're actually stealing from the company. And, you know.
So it's a confessional moment.
Yeah, so we have a couple of things here, not mentioning just a work violation, but a faith violation as well.
Can I say something, chime in, John?
Yeah.
I should quickly point out, Tyson Foods' model of workplace chaplains is one of many. It's not the only model, and it's not necessarily the right or the wrong model. It's just what they've chosen with their critical scale and mass. Bill has a chaplains program at Packmore with 7 chaplains, I think, spreading over two plants. There are chaplain services agencies, just like you can hire a temporary secretary or a temporary software worker. You can hire companies that will provide trained chaplains for you. So there's lots of different models. Some are much more overt about the chaplain sharing Christ with people. Some are not. So there's different models. Some, to the earlier question, are interfaith. That they say, well, no, I'm an interfaith chaplain. They refuse to let you know what their core tradition or belief is. So it's all over the map. In fact, I'm writing a book right now on workplace chaplaincy and researching all these different models. So just the PS that this is one model of implementation. And the other point on the proselytizing, I think John's, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of John's core hopes is that people will feel free to talk about their faith, but not shoving it down someone's throat, not having religious harassment or quid pro quo, which is just like sexual harassment and quid pro quo. So to have some careful protection boundaries, but within those boundaries are train tracks so people can talk freely about Buddha, Allah, Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, whatever they want.
When we wrote our core values, and they were first put up on the website, within 24 or 48 hours, we got a question that says, you're a Christian organization, there's no room for the Muslims, the Buddhists, the atheists, the agnostic, and just went down the whole list here. And the way that we responded is we're a faith-friendly company, there is room for everybody here, and that in the end, we all serve a higher calling, which most people in the end call a Godhead or a God figure. So we strive to be faith-friendly, and we strive to honor God. And that's how we carry the dialogue into the conversation. But more than once, when I've said an opening prayer or something at one of our business organizations, I've had people come over and say, Johnny, the next time you say the prayer, you need to go a little bit politically correct and drop out this word and drop out this word. And I think you're referring to that a little bit. So I think it's how do we in effect get the core values of right living and good living, and trying to communicate that there's a way to operate with integrity, operate with honor, and operate with good judgment, and then being respectful of all the faiths that may be in a room together. Yeah. What do the young kids have here in the room? Yeah.
What is your theological stance on food and food production?
Theological stance on food and food production. I have been given an opportunity and an obligation to produce food in the safest way, in an economical way that provides the best food value to have a chance for people to feed their families in an ever-growing and expanding population. And I've been given that responsibility to do it in a way that my actions would honor God.
So can you specify that a little? So like how does that honor God, like in the way you do it?
Well, God has given us a set of talents. God has given us a set of responsibilities. My talents and responsibilities happen to be over in the food industry. So we apply our knowledge of making sure our folks are treated well, making sure our folks that when they go home at the end of the week, they then can take care of their families, they can take care of their dreams, that then we're responsible to the environment, we're responsible to the animals, we're responsible to safe food products. It's always changing, it's always evolving, so the ongoing responsibility in that dialogue with God is to, are we doing it right each and every day? You've asked us to do it, and you've asked us to provide it a meal that then allows families to come together to celebrate whatever they want to celebrate.
So John, where are some of the pressure points in that conversation? Like let's just pick of the couple issues. Let's start with animal welfare. Like where are the debates going on? Where are areas that there's controversy and questions for, let's say, the animal welfare part?
Well, usually the animal welfare issue usually goes beyond science into the emotional debate. Mm-hmm. In the emotional debate, people have different observations on how one should take care of animals. We try to base ours on science that says the animals are taken care of in a safe way, in a humane way, that gives us the best chance to produce a food product that allows folks to be able to not have to spend a lot of their disposable income on food. There's variations of that. One of the hot button issues now is what they call pens for hogs. Mm-hmm. There's several ways to do it. The science on either crates or on open pens. Mm-hmm. When you look at the science, you look at the safety, you look at the animal behavior inside both of those type of operations, will give you different answers. Mm-hmm. But the science doesn't say one way is humanely better than the other one. Mm-hmm. And actually the conversation leads to about a tie. Mm-hmm. So then you get into the emotional debate about this one versus this one. You go into the issue of how much space animals should have. Mm-hmm. And those are the two primary issues. Then you go into the antibiotic hormone issue. Mm-hmm. Within the poultry industry, we don't use that. The cattle industry and the independent cattle farmer has a challenge. They use antibiotics that are USDA guidelines, that are USDA provided by veterinarians that act as some form of growth stimulant. So that creates a debate out there in the community. And a little bit of that applies to the hog industry. So you get up against the personal choice question, up against the science question. The science is always changing, evolving, and what do you learn from the science? Up against how do you put a product out there on a timely basis that allows a value proposition for whatever the customer wants. So.
Yeah, in the blue.
Yeah.
Could you share a trial or struggle that you went through with the company, and how did you overcome it?
Drugs and alcohol, and then earning my respect back in the company, because basically I was not holding up my responsibility in the company and in the jobs and the responsibilities. So I had to take a step back in the organization, and then I had to show to the organization I could follow through on my commitments. And so that took about 2 or 3 years to reestablish my responsibility, my credibility, and my performance. Would have been one to go with it. The second one was that I could get out from underneath my father's shadow, that my message came from a different thought and a different intellectual process, and that the thoughts were organized differently. It just didn't sound like I'd heard something in his office and I was carrying it out into the marketplace. But the personal one was the biggest one. And then I established and then got a chance to run the company, and we've done okay. So. Yes?
It definitely makes sense how your gifts and talents to feed God's people is a Christian calling, and that's great. Is that at all harder to follow through with on the areas of your business where people are using more of like their discretionary spending, like the leather that goes into nice cars?
Actually, could you unpack it a bit more? I didn't quite follow you, just for my benefit. So you understand the food side, right? But not feeding God's Ferraris?
Not necessarily Ferraris. So is that at all a struggle for you?
So the creation of a luxury good component? Okay.
Well, the luxury good component, if we don't sell that hide and recover some value, then we've got to take and price the product that we sell to you for human consumption at a higher price to pay for the cost of buying the animals. So you start with the whole animal and you try to generate revenue from all the different things. Chicken feet. We used to take chicken feet and...
Chicken feet or feed?
Feet, chicken feet,
Feet.
yeah, little feet.
Okay, yeah, gotcha. Yeah.
Feet right there, chicken feet. And about 6 or 7 years ago, maybe a little bit longer now, one of our guys was traveling in China and noticed that in China, chicken feet's a delicacy. But in America at that time, we were putting it into the dog food chain. And a lot of the byproduct goes into the pet food chain. So we go from putting chicken feet into dog food at 2 or 3 cents a pound to now that we have large chicken paws, we have medium chicken paws, we have small chicken paws, and we're getting 50, 60, 70 cents a pound. So I use that as an example, I use the leather as an example because how do you gather revenue back against the original purchase cost of the animal so you can hold down the price or manage the price of the product that the consumer's doing it. So leather too, and a lot of the leather goes into different values. The good leathers go into the high end. The leathers that got a little scuff on them will go into a different price type, whether it's to shoes or some other stuff.
So in other words, every time you buy a product, you buy it first for you've just underwritten someone else's food at the basic level.
Yeah, and that's one way to say it. Thank you. I
Yeah.
have to reframe that. Yeah. What do you have?
Hi. What would you classify as unacceptable treatment of animals within your company?
Well, I think any time that an animal is abused, kicked, thrown, those type, I mean, what you would do to, what somebody wouldn't do to their dog or somebody wouldn't do to their cat would be very quickly unacceptable behavior to me.
So, have you ever encountered that?
I have not seen it with my own eyes. There's been video out there where people have gone into plants, not into plants, but into farms, and I've seen video of some people on farms where people were mishandling the animals, and those videos are out there, and that's just simply unacceptable. There's no need for it. Does that answer your question?
That answers my question. I guess, it's different because we don't raise our dogs to kill them.
Not in this culture.
Right.
Not in this culture. So you got to take we got to go around the world where dog is a delicacy and actually is on the menus around the world. So, but go ahead. Yeah. But in this culture, no, we don't.
Yeah. So when you've got like all these pigs and all these chickens together, do you think there's a certain way in which it would be good to make things more comfortable for them while they're around?
There's a way to manage the animals to make sure they got as much comfortable as available to them. In studying the behavior of chickens, chickens by nature don't move. They just kind of sit around. To move chickens, you got to get behind them and do this to get them to move. That's their personality. So the question is how much space do you give them in effect, to walk around in this area? But a chicken's not going to get from this room and walk to the other side of the room by habit. They stay within their space. So the question comes, how much room should they have within their, in effect, room? And then how do you manage, how to make sure you got air circulation? How do you make sure you got good feed and water on a timely basis for them? And then every day, the farmers that manage our animals are out in the houses, interacting with the animals, walking through it, kind of getting them up off their feet, stirring them around. But chickens by nature don't move around very much. The question on the hog pens is a little more complicated because hogs are very aggressive. So when you're going into the farrowing situation, how do you protect the baby pigs from the aggressive mother once the baby pigs are born? And that is a conversation that's going on now between whether you use crates or whether you use farrowing pens. The crates, the argument is you're keeping them in a kind of confined space, but they don't attack their animals, they don't attack their babies. You go into the farrowing pens, they got a little more room, but they're liable to, in effect, attack their babies. So that's kind of the social debate there, and the science doesn't say yet which one's really better. And that's kind of one of the questions, and I'm not sure what the right answer is.
One more question.
Sure.
So what when I walk into a grocery store like Whole Foods, they've got these labels on some of the meat that says certified, humanely raised and handled. What does that mean?
That means that there's a third-party group out there that will go out there and look at how you raise animals and then say, oh yeah, you're doing a nice job. It's not unlike organic product. For organic chicken, the difference between organic chicken and between the product that we raise is two components. The animals get a little more space, and then the corn and soybeans that are fed to organic chickens come from a piece of land that somebody has gone out and certified and said that's organic corn, that's organic soybeans. So there's a little bit of marketing game within that deal. The question I come to is, how much can we ask people to pay for when you look at the science and the value proposition to, in effect, try to implement those? This country's very blessed, and we have a lot of food, and we waste a lot of food. The amount of food that we throw away from restaurants and by some of the regulations around is pretty staggering. And you try to get over into Africa and the third world countries, and how do you figure out how to feed folks there that are just now coming up in economic opportunity? One of the biggest challenges that I see is Africa is starting to produce a little excess grain. There are better grain seeds out there, and this gets in the GMO debate, that would work better in Africa, and
That's the genetically modified food type stuff,
yeah.
right?
So the GMOs would actually produce more bushels per land, but their biggest trading partner is Europe, and Europe won't accept GMOs. But yet, Europe will send them a bunch of money, and I'm saying, okay, I understand both sides of the argument, but I believe people raising their own grains and raising and creating an economic system is better than sending money back and forth. So those are the questions that our company gets to be involved in and discuss, and there's no easy answer. You got another question? I got a lady back there. Hi.
What's your company's stance on the whole genetic modification situation? The corn that you feed to the chickens, and how do you feel? What do you feel is your, God-given responsibility?
John, could you paraphrase that just for someone who may not have heard that?
Well, the question is what is the company's position, which would be my position, on GMOs in corn and genetically modified? To a degree, I think all grains have been modified. Some, because basically you put two seeds together and you pick out the best seeds. You put two seeds together, you pick out. That's what's been going on for it's a statistical type situation. GMOs, I think, have demonstrated around the world that there's an opportunity to increase production to feed the ever-growing population increase and the ever-growing economic increase. We were talking at dinner tonight, there's a report out of an NGO organization over in Europe that in 37 years, in the year 2050, with the way the population is growing, we are going to have to double the food production system as it exists today. I don't think we can do that. And I think the analogy I'd make to you, remember when oil was $30, then it went to $60 a barrel, then it went to $90 a barrel. We're trading oil at about $90, but at one time it was $30. You're getting ready to see maybe that same dynamic happen within the food industry if we don't solve some of these problems on trying to answer and anticipate a world that's getting more economic dollars to spend. But I think GMOs have their right place. I think they need to be assessed, they need to be questioned, they need to be studied, but I do believe they have a role in trying to feed a changing population and a population that's getting more disposable economic dollars.
Have you guys considered the French study that was recently released?
Have we considered what?
The French study that was recently released?
The French?
Genetic modified corn, they have the rats that increase about 50% in cancers.
I've not seen that study, so I wouldn't want to comment on it. So I'm uninformed about that. There are different studies out there that I think we can find that would support a GMO argument, and there are studies out there that raise concerns that we should study and try to understand. But the one that you're reporting about, I've not seen that one or read about it. But john.tyson@tyson.com, send it to me, I'll read it. Yes?
You mentioned Africa, and I was wondering, do you have any influence in Africa right now, and do you think or advocate for the African people to do local farming to convert to more large-scale commercial farming?
I think the challenge for us in the Western world is to figure out how to scale down. And how do we scale down and create small economic farming units so then we can have people, in effect, taking care of each other. We've got some startup type ideals going in Rwanda. we're in a project where we've got some chicken houses, and the ideal is to have commercial hens laying eggs, so then in effect we can get eggs into the population for protein. We're about 2 to 3 years into that. To me, one of the bigger questions you got to ask is, if you start to produce excess grain in Africa, or you start to produce excess grain in some of the third world countries, should you take it out of people's mouths and feed animals? To me, that's the first question you got to go through. You know, so if you start
For someone who doesn't understand the food chain, what do you mean by that?
Well, instead of feeding the grain to the animals so you can have a boneless, skinless chicken breast or a buffalo chicken wing or something like that, should you not make sure there's plenty of grain to feed more numbers? And I think that becomes the question. So you got grain,
Human feed versus animal feed, essentially.
and then you've got the water issue, and you've got infrastructure issues. So that in effect becomes a question inside the conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Tyson, you said that your company is faith-based,
Mm-hmm.
and
Actually, if I can interrupt, he said faith-friendly,
Faith-friendly.
not faith-based.
David
Yep.
corrects me all the time, because I'll say faith-based also. Yeah.
Sorry.
for being faith-friendly, how often do you guys have religious conflicts within your organization? And with you being a Christian, how do you deal with that, since you're coming from a Christian background, but you're faith-friendly? And so if it's between different religious conflicts, how do you deal with that?
Well, I'll give you.
Can you paraphrase just for the camera there? Yes.
The question is how do we handle religious conflicts within the organization? And then me being a Christian, then how would I handle it myself? I think one of the classical ones, a misinterpretation, it still floats up about every Labor Day, is an issue that happened at our Shelbyville, Tennessee plant. It's a large Muslim population. And about 5 or 6 years ago, it got out into the press that we had taken the Labor Day holiday away from the plant and had given them the Muslim holiday as a holiday. And some people got upset about it. What they didn't understand was the dynamics of what was going on in the plant. It's a union plant. The 11 representatives, I think there was only one Muslim of the 11, but the plant is a fresh plant. And so they work on Labor Day because they have to get fresh chicken back into the grocery stores to replenish from the holiday. And so the union voted and said, well, if we're working Labor Day anyway, and have been working for the last 10 or 11 years, they said, well, yeah, we'll just move our holiday to this holiday. And it went around that we were un-American, that we were unpatriotic. So that was one example of where people didn't understand. It was a local decision made at a local issue, and the folks in the plant decided based on the union representation and how they wanted to run their plant. So each plant has a different situation. Religious conflicts show up. One of the ones we have is I forget where the location, we have a large Somalian population. And we have female supervisor. Somalian men will not look women in the eye, and they will not take an instruction from women. How do you get around that? What do you do? How do you have it's a cultural issue. There's no disrespect being shown, but it's culturally an issue. So how do you have the conversation? How do you have the dialogue? Those are the nuances that pop up. There's probably as much.
And some of those cultures are shaped by religious identity, just like our country is shaped by religious identities. And so that's where the workplace chaplains often are the ones that, kind of like old day anthropologists, that they understand the conversation, which as sort of a white male Protestant, I'm not going to get, or Johnny may not get. So they help translate that, so it's not just bad behavior. It's like, okay, there's a cultural dynamic. Nevertheless, they're in this country, and there are laws that have to be followed. How do we get there in a way that can work for both the men and the women? You've also had, John, I think people from other countries bring their local wars from
wars into the
here,
plant,
even
yeah.
within the same religious tradition. So Muslims of different types is one example where they had to learn to live together. They were importing their conflict with
their conflicts from the country they came. We get a lot of first generation, or not first generation, the generations that leave when there's political instability going on in a country. One of the first migrations of people is when the Vietnam War ended, and people were being airlifted out of Vietnam, and they were airlifted to Fort Chaffee, which happened to be in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and they started to transition into the plant, doctors and lawyers and educated people. So we see that. We've got people when the Bosnian conflict started. We had people coming out of Bosnia. We got people from Sudan, Somalia. So we see a lot of the best and the brightest coming out of some of these political conflicts. And then a family will show up, or 50 or 100, and we'll work with the government agencies about locations and things like that. And the next thing you know, 100 become 300, become 500, because they say, come here, it's okay, it's comfortable, we're here, and they start to bring the families. Those dynamics come to us, and then we've got to learn as we go along, and we have to adjust and come up to speed very quickly, become historians, become knowledgeable, and as David said, 2-degree anthropologists.
And some of those then are not as educated, though.
He had his hand up
just
first,
to
and I'll come back to
complicate
you.
it.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I understand with programs like the workplace chaplains and such, you're wanting to treat the workers as like whole persons, is in a sense, I'm going to use this word an ecological view of persons, so that you're not simply you're going beyond or maybe before like strictly scientific or like mathematical views of your workers, I guess you could say. And I just wonder how that, like, this is kind of a loaded question maybe, but I wonder how that is applied to how that plays out like in the protein business itself, like in the factories, because it seems to me that's kind of I'll just say, I guess it seems kind of ironic to me, because in some ways it's the factories themselves are almost, or at least pinned, as some people could say, that they're anti-ecological, as opposed to, I don't know, a small-scale farm that seems to, I don't know, you know, the bird is always with the big animal, like in those pictures, we always see the bird on the rhinoceros's horns and such, but in this system, the birds are all in a big factory and don't see the sun, or maybe they do, I don't know the details. And so it just made me think about that. Like, are there any? I guess, do you think you for the protein business, is it simply, or do you take this sort of method of wholeness into play too, or are you trying to do that? Because it seems that, or from my impression, it seems that it's strictly just this is how we make the chickens as big as fast as possible, and that's not really true.
Can I try to paraphrase about holistic treatment of people and holistic treatment of animals? Is that? I want to just try to get.
It's a holistic treatment of the whole process, from the animal all the way through into the facility, which goes then with the people handling the animal all the way out into the marketplace. We've tried through the years, through the evolution of the industry, to organize in a way that creates the most efficiency with the best treatment of animals. And then we try, through the years, when I was in the plants, a lot of the jobs were done by hand. We've learned how to mechanize them. We've learned how to automate them, so people now are, instead of putting their hands on the product, they're still, when you're dealing with proteins or food, you still got to have a knife out and you got to cut and shape things. But we've learned how to try to organize it continuously. But there is a wholeness to it, start to finish. But it is an organized production system to create a value proposition into the marketplace. So, does that answer your question? Is that where you were headed?
I guess I just, I don't know, it could go on too long.
We'll think about it and come back to it.
Can I say something real quick though about what I meant with like the bird on the rhinoceros's horn sort of thing, like that sort of picture, is just the way we think of nature working. I guess it seems to me that there are programs. What I meant by the full picture, there are programs that take into account these sorts of relationships, like these symbiotic relationships.
Correct.
That actually take care of the issues, like the chickens. Take care of some of the pests that affect the other animals, so you wouldn't need necessarily antibiotics and need the same degree if they're all working together in some sort of system, as opposed to in all of them.
I think the question you got to ask is how do you create the pastoral farm relationship that you're talking to? A couple of cattle, a couple of chickens, a couple of hogs running around. Mom and dad are going out there in the morning. They're asking you, the kid, to go out and pick up the chicken, kill the chicken, and feed the family. But that's where they go to. That's the historical pastoral deal. How much can you organize that way? How much land would it take to organize that way? What would then be the delivered cost up against organizing in another humane way to be able to then meet the needs of the marketplace. And that, I think that becomes the choices of question. We could not feed the population to the degree at the prices that you talk about under that deal. But there are those that do it that way on a limited scale. But then there's the other side of the equation that we choose to do it in our holistic way.
I think you had a question.
You had a
for John,
question
yeah.
right here, and then we'll go to you.
I'm not sure the best terminology to use to ask this question.
Sure, go ahead.
But I was curious about when you were talking a little bit about the GMO debate and the idea that the demand for food is increasing as more economic dollars are being able to be spent. And so I was kind of curious about, like as a Christian, you wrestling with the call not only to feed people, but almost like the call to like not overfeed people, like encourage, I guess like wasteful behavior type thing. But like, so I was wondering like,
Are you going to the obesity question?
I mean, but in a sense, I wonder like how much like is it the demand is increasing, but like the necessity is not, and like how do you kind of wrestle with like I don't want to encourage like just wasteful, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, to me, the wastefulness is, I always remember, and most folks in this room remember, his mother, mom, and dad saying, eat everything on your plate. And, you know, so psychologically, you know, I know my stomach's full at about 3 or 4 ounces, but they serve me 6 ounces, and so I go ahead and eat. And so, but I think a lot of the waste is because of our sanitation laws and because of some recycling laws. Restaurants struggle to take the excess food. Some of them have gotten pretty good programs, but because there have been situations where the food wasn't handled very well at the end of the day, or maybe the Dean can or something and people got ill, the way the government chose to regulate was just throw it all away. Yet there's a lot of good food available that could go into some of the feeding programs and some of the church programs and some of the Salvation Army type programs. We're getting better at that, and we're learning how to do that. I think restaurants are adapting back of the house operations that preserve the food better. Those of us in the industry are knowing how to take product that to you might say the box was crushed, product inside still good, but the box was crushed. How do you pull that out and take and use it in the situation? But we in America get a lot of good value for food. Our portion sizes are probably too big. When portion sizes and obesity popped up about 3 or 4 years ago in the ongoing question, there's a restaurant chain, and I forget the name of it, effectively went out there and cut all of their portion costs, their portion sizes in half. So they went from 5 ounces to 3 ounces. Their menus went from like $6.99 down to $3.99. In 2 months, they were almost bankrupt. They had to put their menu back out to the same thing. They're still in business, but they tried to make that cut to see if you and I would go eat there. We didn't show up because there wasn't enough food on the plate, but they tried it. What's your question?
What's Tyson's view on antibiotics for the chickens, and how does an organic chicken compare health-wise to the chickens that you purchase?
So what's Tyson's view on organic antibiotics for chicken?
Antibiotics in chicken.
And how does an organic chicken compare to a non-organic, or whatever?
Well, I gave you the definition on organic chicken. We don't use antibiotics in the poultry industry except at a very limited, in about 1/10% on the breeding chicks, on the moms. And that's done when a veterinarian says the animals are sick and you put them into it, and that's on 1/10%. But the rest of the animals in the poultry industry, there are not antibiotics used. Most of it's over in the antibiotic growth hormone inside the independent cattle industry. It's been there for 10 or 15 years. That debate's going on. I'm not sure where it's going to settle out. There's a little bit within the pork industry, but it's been out of the poultry industry probably 10, 15, 20 years. There is the residual based on a veterinarian request when the moms are not feeling well, and it's done under that. And then it would be out of the animal real quick after about 3 days. So, yeah, right here.
Oh, thank you.
Hi.
Hi. Okay, you spoke about religious conflict within your organization. I'm thinking of religious conflict with the government, such as what Hobby Lobby is dealing with. It's a big legal suit. So, have you had any conflicts with that, or what are your thoughts on it?
I think one of the primary differences between us and Hobby Lobby is we're a public company, so it's an easy answer. It's an easy public answer. By being responsible to public shareholders, then we're held to a different standard because of the legal obligation being a public company. him being a private company has some different choices. We were having this conversation earlier on. I think sometime in the future, if the theory is, and I think I'm right, there's lawyers around here, but you have the right to not hire people who are smokers. You can say in your workplace, smoking is not permitted and this, and you can choose that as part of your hiring process. I think in the next 3 or 5 years, you might see it on somebody's employment form. Are you for or against an abortion? I have the right to ask that question, and ever how you state it, then I can choose to hire or not hire you based on my belief as a private. I don't think public companies can do it, but I think private companies will get in a position to do that. And it'll be interesting to see where it goes in the legal question. What they call personal belief hiring questions.
So as chairman, what would you say kind of a normal month looks like for you? So what are you thinking about and what are you doing?
In the chairman's role, I try to stay in the philosophical direction of the company, in the big picture direction. So mine kind of ebbs and flows, and I get real busy about 6 weeks out, headed into the quarterly board meetings. And then after the board meeting's over with, it kind of slows down a little bit, and we kind of say, okay, this is what we talked about at the board meetings. Let's all go out and try to take the information that came from the board, came from the discussions, put them into place, adjust, tweak, and then it'll ramp back up as I go into the board meetings. That's kind of my ebb and flow as a chairman. My biggest challenge growing up in the company is to stay out of management's way. I mean, because I can see something, I can read something, I can look at something, and I've got to figure out, Johnny, you've asked them to run the company, you've given them the responsibility to run the company. You're not there day in and day out, 24/7, 7 days a week, so you need to respect them and stay over here. And that's the hardest challenge for me in my role in my transition. I think the other role that's hard is those that grow up in operations, and then when you ask them to become a CEO, how do they let go of being an operational type manager and just being a CEO? Because the CEO gets all the stuff that nobody else wants. When my dad asked me to be chairman and CEO, he said, "Welcome to the job." And I said, "Well, that's great." He says, "Now you get everything nobody else wants to do." But in the chairman's role, it's about the ebb and flow going in and off the board meetings. But the biggest challenge is just staying out of their way.
And if I could have, those of you who are going to go into leadership positions in the corporate world or any sort of organizational life, I think the outsider's view, and I think when I was back at your age, and that I thought the higher up you went, like the cooler it was, and the more prestigious it was, the more money you make, and life is easier because you just tell everyone else what to do. Well, you do make more money, that's true, but about everything else is wrong. That essentially all the problems that couldn't have been solved at levels lower than you get escalated up. And by definition, all those problems they're like all the excellent hard questions many of you are asking. Like, well, what do you do? And there's not always quick and easy, facile answers. So I think it's the chief problem solver of the issues no one else wanted to touch or was able to solve, and it's heavy shoulders.
Yeah. I want to speak, before your question, to the students here in the room. One of the things that I see in my company is the challenge or the burnout when kids are 28 to 32. Yeah. We see a lot of kids that come in, they go to school, they get the degree, they go to work. And then they get to age 28 to 32. Some of them are real happy in the organization and want to stay there. Some of them are going, and Phil Knight and I were talking about this. Phil runs Nike, and we were having a conversation about this one night. And the question was, what's really happening to these kids 28 to 32? And the real question is the kids did not take advantage of their college years. They didn't touch all of their emotions. They didn't touch all of their feelings. They didn't touch or they didn't explore. They said, I got to go to school, I got to get my degree, and I got to go to work. And they get to age 28 to 32, and they're miserable. He was talking about people having great jobs at Nike, and they were miserable there. And there's three things that happen. Some of them who know they're doing what they want to do go on. There are those that will just go sideways. They just start to drift on you. They kind of give an effort. And then there are those that have the courage, along with their significant others, say, we're not happy here, it's not what we wanted. And they take the decision to say, hey, we don't want to be in the corporate world, we're going to go do ministry work. So I encourage you all, while you're here in school, and your parents probably don't want to hear this advice, is do what you want to do, touch what you want to do. If you're studying accounting and you think you wanted to take an art class, go take an art class. If you're in an art class and you think you like accounting, go take an accounting. touch those feelings, touch those emotions. So you've brought that into your whole being, so that when you go into the marketplace and you enter on your path of what you want to do, you've tried to remove as many doubts or questions about it is who you want to be. So I encourage you to do that as you work your way through the college process. You had a question.
Yeah. So on your website, you say that you strive to be stewards of the land, the environment, and animals.
Correct.
And I'm just wondering about your specific ethical stance in that, because I know this is talk about ethics. So I know you've lumped these two categories of emotional and scientific, and say you don't want to care, or the emotional is not your priority, it's about scientific production. Your primary ethic, I take, is for the consumer, providing the
No, I didn't say that. I said that's the question.
Okay, yeah,
Okay.
right. So your care is for the consumer, providing the cheapest food for the most amount of people. And so I'm wondering if you could give your personal ethic about animal treatment and about specifically treatment of the environment in the face of the global ecological crisis, global warming, climate change, what have you. And does that differ in any way from your company's policies and actions? Does that question make sense?
The question, they don't differ because my name's on the door.
Okay, great. So can you give your company's personal ethic?
So to me, the question of the environmental question is how do we manage the animals in a way that's healthy for them, that's healthy for the environment? When you have a set of animals, you're going to get a set of chicken litter. A chicken litter, in effect, is an organic fertilizer. So then the question becomes is, how do you manage the organic fertilizer in a proper way for land application, because it has nitrogen, it has phosphorus in there, which in effect will grow hay to feed the cattle. Now, a farmer is going to put a fertilizer on their land. It could be a chemical-based, petroleum-based fertilizer that you can go buy 5-gallon buckets at a source. So the question comes back again to the human element of proper management for proper loads of nitrogen and phosphorus onto the ground. And that is an educational science, and then how do you make sure you do it at the right time in the right place? If you put a fertilizer next to the stream on a big rainstorm, well, it's going to go, that's stupidity. So the question comes back to knowledge, science, and then the human issue of manage it in a proper way.
Okay.
Does that answer that part of the question for you?
So your definition of stewardship would be management of property.
My definition of stewardship is, yeah, you're given a set of responsibilities, and you have to manage them in an ethical, moral, and right way.
Who would you say your responsibility is to, if that makes sense?
My responsibility is to my neighbors and the people I live with.
Okay, so not the animals.
Huh?
So not primarily the animals. Your responsibility is primarily to your consumer.
No, I said to my neighbors and the people I live around. And so if I'm taking care of my neighbors, that means I got to take care of the animals in a way where the animals would not interfere with my neighbors.
Okay, that makes sense, yeah.
So,
Does anyone, quick,
yeah.
quick little etymology quiz. Anyone know the root English root of the word stewardship? It's, you know this, Johnny?
No, I was getting ready to learn something, Professor.
Oh yeah, there we go. So, well, and I learned this from my professor, so I can't.
Okay.
Stewardship is the ward of the sty, ward of the pigsty. Back in Middle Ages English, the people who were, wealth wasn't money in the bank. Wealth was how many head of cattle you had, what your livestock count was, and usually the owner of all that wasn't out being the operational COO. He was sort of just enjoying the fruits of someone else's labor, and you picked the person that was most trusted in your household to take care of the pigsty. So the ward of the sty, the steward, is the most trusted person to take care of your asset profile, which then was cattle and livestock.
How much time we got, and how do we need to wrap up?
About 5 minutes.
Okay.
And when we do, John, I thought when we wrap up, I would wrap up with a little story about Johnny Lee and the values card.
Okay, I'll leave that up to you. Do you have a question, Professor?
I do.
Okay.
You mentioned one of your plants, and you mentioned that it was a unionized plant, right?
Mm-hmm.
So of course, the question of unions is one that some people love unions, some people hate unions, right? So, what is your take on that? Because, like when David was asking about the workplace chaplaincy thing, I mean, I think one of the questions some people would have is, you know, are workplace chaplains dulling people so that they wouldn't want to unionize if it's not a unionized plant, for example?
Mm-hmm.
So, are they keeping the people, you know?
Opiate of the masses.
Yeah, exactly. Placated, right. So, so that they wouldn't care about their rights and how they're being taken care of by the company, so that they can be taken advantage of by the company, right? So, so I was wondering how you thought about, you know, your obligations to, you know, with all these responsibilities you discussed. How does where would unions be helpful, not helpful?
Well, I think the opportunity is how do you have the right dialogue with the people you're working with? And we've had chaplains in plants where the union's been decertified, and we've had chaplains in plants where a union's gone into. I think in the end, the conversation comes back is, are the folks who are working with the people, are they being responsible, are they being respectful, are they being listened to, and are they being taken care of in a way that they know that when they come to work on Monday, they're going to go home, be paid fair, going to have benefits, going to have health care, and they know they can go home safely Friday and take care of their families. That's the overall responsibility. I think in the past, unions were necessary because I don't think management responded that way. In today's environment, I think there is a better dialogue between people and folks working together. Some places there may still be a need for a union. My belief, if we're doing our job the right way, we shouldn't need to have a third party to be able to talk to our folks. But about 30% of our workforce is unionized today. So, yeah.
You mentioned that your job as chairman is deciding philosophical direction of the company. And I wanted to ask about what your philosophical direction is with this chaplaincy. What do you want to achieve? For example, I mean, if you want to envision your company 10 years down the road, what do you want to, how do you want this company to be different than what it is today because of chaplaincy?
To me, the purpose of the chaplains is to create the environment where there's a permission for people to live their faith where they work, to create the dialogue within the facilities, within the office of the different faiths, and that 95, as we were talking earlier, when we all sit down, we have about 95% of the same problems. We're worried about our family, we're worried about our kids, we're worried about mom, dad, all the issues that go on. That out of that dialogue, people of different faiths will realize we have a lot more in common than what we have different. And then out of that conversation, it leads to a healthy dialogue. And that then in time, for me, and being a Christian, that the good Lord will in effect figure out how to bring His dialogue in front of those people who don't believe in Christ.
How about one more question from folks? I got a closing comment you want to make, Johnny?
No, why don't we take two more questions and we'll wrap up. One student, one adult. How would we do that?
There we go.
Okay.
You mentioned earlier that you were living under your father's shadow.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, was this what you always wanted to do, or is there something else?
I always thought I'd run a big company. I thought I'd run something like Ford or GM or something like that. I just never saw Tyson Foods getting this big. But I always knew from a young age I'd be running a big, large, major corporation in America.
Tyson got big, then you knew you wanted to run it.
I just grew up in it. I grew up in it. I mean, my dad gave me permission more than once, to leave along the way.
Permission to leave.
And the dialogue was, in the end, my responsibility is to make sure I get a fair return on the family money. And he said along the way, maybe one of these days you won't own the poultry company because you can take those set of assets and get a different return somewhere else. But I think the greater opportunity for our company today is we're in the middle of the debate of the questions we've been talking about today. How do you feed people? How do you address GMOs? How do you address farm issues? How do you address animal issues? How do you address environment? We're in the middle of that dialogue, and what more exciting time to be in a company and to be part of a management team where you're at the table trying to address what are perceived social issues, what are perceived, how do you feed? To me, that's an exciting place to be. Big problems, no easy answers. To me, that's really exciting to be in that dialogue because we are a leader up against the animal protein industry, not only there but perceived around the world. So to me, that's pretty exciting if you think about the opportunities there, besides making sure we run a business each day.
So the big word right now is sequestration.
Yeah.
And the news channels are working overtime to tell us what's going to happen or what might happen. And I saw a chicken processing plant that they said, oh, we're going to have to close because there won't be any food inspectors. You know, how does that affect you?
It'll be on a rotating basis. We'll probably run 4 days a week instead of 5 days a week. Cost will go up, product will back up, price will go down for a while, then the price will go up and the consumer will pay for it. So, one more question? Yeah, right there, Scott.
Yeah, what's your view of, talk about stewardship, we talked about animals, we talked about GMO, about finance, profit, right? I mean, profit's a bad word to a lot of people in business, right? So, or outside of the business. So, what about profit? How do you handle that? How are you steward with that talent that God's given you, right?
Well, I think it's, how do you get a fair return on your money, and how do you then take that fair return and invest it in your money back in. So for us, getting a fair return, and then if we can take that money and go buy equipment that takes a tough job and make it easier, is one of our first responsibilities. Making sure we're a good neighbor in the neighborhood, because we're usually the largest employer in small town USA. So what are we doing in the neighborhoods to make sure, we're helping with the issues of the local deal? But, there's a chance to make a fair return. But agriculture, and a lot of you all probably have friends or family, that 1 year you make a lot of money and 1 year you lose a lot of money. Now you're even, and it's that middle year you hope you get a fair return. So that's about where it rolls out.
Johnny, any last thoughts you want to give?
No, David, I'll let you wrap. Thank you all.
Well, yeah, first, thank you. I just want to say one thing and then close with the story. The thing I want to say is what's going on here in this room is you're part of particularly I'm speaking now to the students, you're part of a nationwide movement that's going on. The people of faith, whether Christian, Jewish, spiritual, but not religious, you're wanting to take your value sets into the places you work, and you're trying to live a holistic, integrated life, and you want to work for a place that more or less shares your value. There's a good alignment. And for a lot of people, faith is part of that mix. And it's not just here in the States. I mentioned earlier Beijing. I've gone to some house church meetings and some faith at work meetings. Young entrepreneurs, your age to sort of about age 35, who are all trying to figure out what it means to be a Christian and to run a business in modern day China. I mean, it's really edgy, exciting stuff. So you're part of something really big, and I just want to affirm you in wherever that journey may take you. And the second is close of the story. John mentioned earlier these core values, and some of you have been Googling up, looking on the website. When they were first put into place, there was, John asked me to assist a little bit, and there was one of his meetings with top sort of 100 officers of the organization gathered in a big auditorium conference room. And John left the room because he wanted to hear the debate. He didn't want his presence to stifle the debate. If someone thought it was really a bunch of bull, he wanted to have it be found out. So he stepped out, had various conversations, and two stories take him out of heaven. One is everyone said, we're going to get sued, this is going to be a disaster, what about this, what about that? And finally one person said, well, wouldn't it be nice to be sued once for something that we believe in? So that sort of lightened the atmosphere up, and the lawyers and the HR people had to give up, and that went forward. Another meeting is that same audience, and now the core values have been in place about 6 months. And John didn't print up T-shirts. The chief marketing officer, he wanted to do T-shirts and posters and coffee mugs, and the only thing that they ended up, that John says, no, we'll have little wallet cards printed up. And there was a meeting where one of John's top 5 executives, a direct report, this when John was CEO as well, and and let's call him, his name is Tommy. We'll make it. Tommy stands up, and as one does before a presentation, we'll often start with a little joke or something. So he started off with a joke. And the joke that Tommy told was one little problem. It was a sexist joke. And when he said at the end of the joke, about a third of the people of John's top 100 officers laughed uproariously because it was a knee slapper. About a third were appalled that an officer of the company would tell a sexist joke. And about a third kind of had a little nervous, they just didn't know which way to go, what was going to happen here. Well, he finishes his talk, it was all about business stuff. He gets down, and then it was break, and I was supposed to give a presentation after the break. And just as I'm about ready to start, Tommy, this other guy, comes up, and he says, excuse me, David, I need to talk to everyone first. And he reaches into his pocket. I didn't know what was going on. And he goes and he pulls out the doggone wallet card. And he's like a good old boy. Like, you know, he eats rusty nails for breakfast. And he's crying. He's crying in front of all these people, his peers. And he said, during break, one of you came up to me and said that my joke was sexist and it was really offensive. And I owe you all an apology. It's not in keeping with our core values. And those, like, you could hear a pin drop when he did it. And then there was sort of this slow, like, a round of applause. And everyone just hugely applauded him. And I knew at that point that the company wasn't going to be perfect. We still had 1,001 problems. But the needle had moved a little bit. And people weren't just sort of being cynical or playing games. That there was a genuine attempt to try to create a special kind of environment, to strive. So I leave that story with you, and that's all what you're doing. You're trying to create that kind of environment. That's the kind of people you want to be in the companies you want to create and build and work for. And I wish you every blessing as you strive to live out your faith at work, whatever it may be. Vince, thanks very much.
Thanks, Vince.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you all.
Thank you.